All right, welcome to Crossfire Republic. This is your host Cujo. With me, as always, Casey. How you doing, brother?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, enough of the pleasantries. Before we get started, you know what we got to do? We got to lock and load. We got a tough one today, so we're going to need to prepare. Oh, I'm empty. Where did my new one go? Well, this is quite the
That's right. Well, he's gone. I threw one in, and we'll wait for him to get back. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about the recent Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship. Probably one of the biggest decisions to come out of the Supreme Court, probably since the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
That's right, brother. We're going to get into that Supreme Court ruling and see how they could come to the conclusion that they're at, what that means for the future of our nation, how that's going to impact everything from economy to democracy to everything. So before we get into that, though, we just celebrated 250 years as a nation, bro. 250 years since the Declaration of Independence. How'd your 4th of July go?
My 4th of July was awesome. I was with friends and family, and we were just barbecuing and celebrating America. I love this country. I'm so happy to be an American and be born here. And when I think about America, I think about America stands for excellence, striving for greatness. 250 is awesome, but I think America could be Rome and surpass what Rome did.
Yeah, buddy. Hey, if we don't beat Rome, we have failed as a nation. Listen, it should be a competition no matter what you're doing. And running a nation, being a nation, that should be a competition. We should want to. As Americans, left, right, center, wherever, as Americans, we should be striving to go down in history as the greatest civilization that has ever existed. We should want to beat all these ancient nations who outlasted where we're currently at. And we should also look at the things that went wrong and what led to their demise, because oftentimes strengths become weaknesses. And if we disregard that and we don't adjust our perspective, it could ultimately lead to the downfall. But for now, America, the freest, the strongest, the most influential nation on planet Earth, and we celebrated 250 years, a quarter of a millennia. Double check that. I've been saying century all week long. Feel like a buffoon, but that's all right. 250 years is a long time, man. And I've been feeling a little defeated the last year or so on the American patriotism, and I was super excited for this one. I mean, a quarter of a millennia is insane to me. 250 years, that's a huge milestone. And, as we were leading up, Colorado, as fires have been going on, everything's on fire, it seems here. And so there was a canceling of the fireworks shows. And I understand a lot of that. And, when high fire risk, you have chances of embers carrying and starting fires that could cause devastation. And so, part of me understands the canceling of the fireworks, but there's certain locations that had scheduled shows that the probability of embers carrying outside city limits into an area that's high brush, high burn area seems close to zero to me. So I don't know why we couldn't have made concessions saying, okay, based off of moisture data, this area we shouldn't have shows, but this area it seems that the risk is low, and 250 years give the people something to celebrate. And as we were moving closer to the 4th, I was like, man, am I going to be able to find it in me to celebrate and be excited about this day? And fast forward the day of, I live in an apartment complex, and I went down to the pool and seeing all the different people of different nationalities, different identities out there celebrating together, coming together as a community, and just celebrating what is the nation's birthday, the greatest nation that's ever existed. It restored a lot in me. And when I got home, of course, the rebels, baby, they brought it for me. I was able to sit on my balcony and observe all the little independent fireworks shows that the citizens were putting on. And I was super grateful for it. It was a great day. Loved every second of it. People were wicked excited, and that restored a lot of that patriotism, which I think is something we desperately need.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we almost have an obligation to do fireworks every single year at this time. Really, if anything else, it's really for the kids. They need to see those explosions. They need to hear the explosions, see the lights that come afterwards, and all those places where you can't do that, and it's kind of like quote unquote outlawed. I think it's so patriotic for those, rebels that are out there doing it themselves, as long as they're safe and everything. But
Yeah,
fireworks go hand in hand with the 4th of July, the Star Spangled Banner. You have to have them.
they were made for one another. With one without the other, it just doesn't feel right. And we were having a conversation off air about like this integration of drone shows. And initially, I was like, okay, sure. If we're always in a drought and there's always fire risk going on, maybe this is a good alternative where I can still get something. And I've seen some drone shows over the past few years, and there's just something about the buildup, the anticipation. There is an emotion it's not just the lights, right? The way the noises are impacting and the buildup to the grand finale and all of that. There's something that's just, it brings and stirs something up inside of you that you just can't replicate with a drone show.
I'm with you. You got to feel that explosion going off, and you can't replicate that with a drone and just lasers. But let me ask you something. I live in Massachusetts. New England is typically very humid in the summertime, but every time I talk to a baby boomer, I swear to God, they tell me that we're in the middle of a drought, and every time it rains, they say, "Oh, we needed it." Does that happen in Colorado too?
I can't play devil's advocate, and I've been out to Massachusetts, right, and visit all the time. I lived out there with you for a time, and it seemed to me every summer that I was there, everything is green and lush and beautiful. Now, our situation here in Colorado is a bit different. For instance,
Okay.
this last winter, I believe it only snowed on 3 occasions, and it's melted off by a day or two later. So we haven't got a ton of moisture, and I kind of knew that this day was coming. But it leads to a bigger philosophical question. Climate's going to change, like regardless of what we do about it, and all throughout human history, conditions have changed in areas where civilizations were thriving. Like it's just a nature of life, and maybe it's a way for the Earth to allow itself to refertilize and do all of that by forcing humans to move and alter around. But if we are at risk, I mean, there are solutions, right? Like eventually we will have to shift where our major metropolitan areas are, all that sort of things. But there are like chemistry based solutions like cloud seeding, for instance. If we knew that there was no inherent risk to human beings, do you think that it would be a good idea to geoengineer these regions, like for instance Phoenix, to allow for more rain so that we can combat these problems? I know this is kind of derailed from the conversation, but it is something interesting that I've thought about.
I'm all on board for geoengineering climates based on certain parts in certain parts of the country in the future. Just at the moment, I think there's a lot of risk. We saw what happened in the UAE when they were cloud seeding, and remember they flooded all of Abu Dhabi. And just I remember seeing all those beautiful Lamborghinis and Ferraris just destroyed, completely flooded out.
Yeah, I do remember. Definitely risked. Like at a certain point, though, we should, once we understand it better, and I don't think we should apply it before we completely understand. But once we understand it better, there's no reason using, just basic physics, math, chemistry, this whole thing, that we wouldn't be able to make every environment that we needed to, however we needed it to. But it's just a matter of dialing that in. Of course, we shouldn't go into anything blindly. But back to the firework thing, because you were saying that you have to feel it, man, the explosions. And I agree 100%. There's just something about it. It's inherent. Maybe it's the same reason a lot of us enjoy Thunder, this whole thing. But a lot of the pushback, and we're veterans, right? We fought in combat together. And a lot of the veterans in the veteran community, I hear saying, like, and we experienced this when we first got out as well. But a lot of the veteran community, oh, the fireworks, the PTSD. What is your thoughts on veterans who are scared of some fireworks?
I never really understood that myself. I remember when we first got back from Afghanistan, someone would slam the door and, I'd feel it in my shoulders a little bit. I might jump a little bit. But, as time's gone on, I'm not like that anymore myself. But I do remember my first 4th of July back, and it was real patriotic back then. I think I ETS'd in 2012. So my first 4th of July would have been 2013. And I remember looking forward to the fireworks. I just walked outside. You kind of expect the loud noises. Part of me is worried that there's a certain amount of veterans that see themselves as victims and say that PTSD is maybe way more than it really is. I think there's a huge difference between the documented shell shock that we saw from, the soldiers in the trenches of World War I, compared to what gets diagnosed as PTSD currently. I also think people are incentivized in some ways to, I guess, dramatize, I guess, the extent of the consequences of their PTSD for just to kind of be a victim. It kind of gets you things like liberals look at you as like you're somebody that needs to be protected. It totally gets you points in some states on like state jobs and stuff. Financially, you're incentivized to do so. So I don't know. It's definitely a tough subject because there are people that do have genuine PTSD, and this doesn't mean to diminish that. But there's a lot of people that I feel like are a little bit more nefarious with it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that the victim thing is the whole driving force of it. And this isn't something that's specific just to veterans, right? Like we see this kind of phenomenon happening. I witnessed it when my daughter was in middle school, and you'd chauffeur them and their friends around, and you'd hear conversations and stuff that they're having. And it seemed a lot of them, like, for instance, the autism thing that has emerged. They would all say that they had autism and that they were proud of like having this sort of dysfunction or whatever. I still am not completely sure on what autism is. The best I've heard it described is it just seems like just a spectrum of personality traits, which that would mean that, like, seems to me everybody falls on that spectrum. So if that is the case, then why are we defining it in general? But it's this victim thing. And I was thinking about this the other day, and it seems to me that it emerges of what you're saying, the incentive. Why are people incentivized to do this? And I think people look around and that they see the people that get treated better are the people that are in victim circumstances. For instance, someone who's dying of cancer, or someone who's cancer is an easy one to point to. You see, they get whenever they come around as an individual, people often praise them, feel empathy for them, and like make them feel good. And people see this and they want to feel good too, right? Who doesn't want to be admired, appreciated, acknowledged, that whole thing? And American culture has turned into this thing where the best way to do that, the easiest way to do that, is not to like go out and work and earn respect of people and put in the effort and work that is required to gain that sort of respect. But instead, they make up these ailments or hyperbolize these ailments so that they can get that sort of reaction from society. And I think it does a real disjustice because there's nothing more un-American than playing victim. America's about overcoming adversity, how strong we are both physically and mentally, and how we can overcome that. And yeah, in terms of the military, like, of course, I mean, we went through some shit in Panjway. So when we got back, of course, like, you're not expecting something in a loud noise or whatever. You get that like jolt and like riled up because boy, we knew as soon as we heard that noise, boom, someone got hit. Let's go. It's game time. We got to protect everybody that's on our team. And so that we were kind of like trained to do this, like a Pavlovian response. And so I understand that, but I think people act as if like they're thrown back into like storming the beaches of Normandy and it's just massacre. Like we went through some shit, but again, comparatively to like what people seen in World War II, for instance, and World War One, it's not comparable. It's just a whole different arena in which we're fighting is different. I mean, just whenever I think about them, like rolling up on those boats, and you know what they're feeling. It's the same thing we were feeling. We talked about it in the episode with Watsy, but there was a time when I'd roll outside the wire, and you just have this eerie feeling, and just like this hollow feeling that like, shit, this could be the last time you get to do this, right? And uh, anyway, it just help me with my train. What was I just talking about?
Well, can I jump in right quick?
I wanted to land the plane, but yeah. Um, oh, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to derail off into a conversation about how, like, imagine rolling up on these U-boats and, like, you know that there's turrets, there's everything just waiting for you. And the probability of you making it across to your objective was, like, basically very, very low. And the courage and strength and mental toughness that required to say, yeah, kiss the picture of your family, your wife and kids, tuck in your dog tags and let's fucking go. It's game time, and do that for the sake of their country and for what is good and right. And it's beautiful. But jump in, buddy. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and you're really describing like it's as you're talking about that, it's bringing vivid imagery to my mind of, what the Marines went through in Iwo Jima and what the Army went through on Omaha Beach and Normandy. And you're right. What those guys went through is not comparable to what we went through. What we went through was tough and it was dangerous and it was amazing, and what an amazing accomplishment. But it's not the greatest thing to ever be done. But I want to circle back to something that you were talking about earlier with the victimhood and everything. And some of this victimhood ideology is kind of like deeply embedded in the American psyche. I talk to people all the time that just have this like deep inherent, I guess, idea that the government always like betrays its soldiers or something, like it uses them and then just throws them away like they're trash. For example, I'll be at work and someone asks me what I have for healthcare, and I'll tell them I got VA healthcare, and they say, "Oh my God, that's horrible. They treat our veterans so bad." And I got to be honest, since I got out of the Army, I've had nothing but great experiences with the VA myself. I feel like they've actually taken great care of me in a lot of ways. So there's also this idea that every single veteran is going to end up homeless, or there's going to be a bunch of them homeless. And I don't know any GWAT veterans, at least that we served with, that ended up homeless. I think that's like actually a very, very tiny fragment of the homeless population would be veterans. Maybe it's different for other eras, like maybe the Vietnam guys. But certainly for GWAT, I don't see that being a trend for us at all. But yet it's deeply embedded into the American psyche, so much so that most people believe this. And I think that's, extremely demoralizing to the country as a whole.
Yeah, I haven't witnessed it either. And of course, we have guys that we served with who aren't like out changing the world or whatever, or maybe struggle with some things. But all the programs, I don't know how anybody who didn't want to end up homeless as a veteran would end up homeless as a veteran. Because if the thing is that if you're pushed that far to the brink, like the VA and all those services will step in, right? There's disability pay. If you're struggling so bad with PTSD that you're on the verge of homelessness because of alcohol addiction and drug addiction to kind of supplement these feelings, then the VA will step in and pay you for these, right? You'll be compensated through disability pay. One of my neighbors here is a veteran who's on the verge of being homeless, and they pay for their housing here at the apartment complex that I live in. So there's tons of programs that help out veterans, and I think that we've done pretty good on that. And my experience with the VA is the same as yours. I have had shoulder surgery through the actual VA hospital, and they did a tremendous job. They got me in pretty quickly. Recovery was great. The surgery was great. The biggest thing that you can push back on is how long it takes to get an appointment with the VA, which that's a real problem and a real concern. And the reason is they're understaffed, right? But they've made up for that. They've addressed that issue by introducing community care. If you can't get an appointment, I don't know if I think it's like 2 weeks out or something like that, they will say, okay, well, we can refer you out into the community for an appointment that comes quicker. And sure, it takes a little bit of effort and stuff on our part to do that, but I think that the government in general has done a pretty good job at making sure that veterans are taken care of, given the financial constraints that our nation faces.
You're absolutely right. Given the financial and labor constraints to that, I feel like there's a sincere effort there. And I wouldn't say that there's any politician that I'm aware of that's gone on record and been like anti veteran or anti take care of veterans. It's something that there's pretty much universal support for countrywide. So I think it would be less demoralizing, and it would maybe be a white pill to the general public if they knew that their thoughts and concerns concerning veterans has been beneficial, and lots of progress has been made towards that. No one's saying that it's perfect or there still can't be improvements, but I think the American public should know that.
Yeah, I agree, brother. For sure. So we're talking about the victim mentality has infiltrated into our society in such a deep way. What do you think? What do you think initiated this sort of thing? Like, where did it emerge from? Because, I mean, our parents' generation, best I could tell, and going back further, these were the people furthest away from a victim mentality mindset. It was all about, yeah, the circumstances suck, but how can we get out of these circumstances, right? And it really shifted, I think, starting with our generation. It feels like to me.
It is really weird because back in the 90s, when we were really coming into our own, it was unpopular to be a victim. It wasn't cool to be a victim. Everybody wanted to be a champion. At everything. We were living off the fumes of Rocky IV,
What's
where he single-handedly defeated communism.
He brought down communism with his left hook, baby. Rock, flag, and eagle, man. Yeah, that was it. We wanted to be great. We wouldn't allow to be a victim. It was frowned upon by society to play that victim.
I'm going to throw this out there, and it's a conspiracy that I've kind of been working on myself. But I would say you really saw the shift of victim mentality start gaining like mass acceptance culturally and institutionally around the same time that Roger Goodell outlawed the cornerbacks from playing defense.
Coincidence? I don't think so. Rocky single-handedly brought down communism, and Roger Goodell single-handedly brought down America by introducing victim mentality. I think there's a direct link there. It is Goodell's fault. Blame Goodell. Goodell's a clown. They hate us because they ain't us. No, but it is interesting how it emerged. And of course, like most things do, it happens in institution, right? Bullying kind of got outlawed, and that kind of started the censorship movement. And in a way, like obviously bullying isn't like the greatest thing or whatever, but I think that it does, like we can look at the negative impacts of something, but that doesn't mean that there aren't positive outcomes from it as well. And, I was bullied. I was always the smallest kid, and I loved sports. So there you go. Like you're going to get bullied, but it made me tougher and it made me able to stand up for myself. And so there was a lot of good benefits that came from being bullied. Now, was it the nicest thing? Did it make everybody's tummy feel good? No, probably not. But there were inherent benefits of that bullying. And that kind of started to fade away right after we got out of high school. I know there was a push for it while we were in high school, and that can be attributed to many things. But it seems that after we left, it really started to make progress. You had all the movies coming out about anti-bullying and all that. And so, yeah, maybe that was the beginning of the end, getting rid of bullies. Make America bullies again. No, I'm just kidding. I neither support nor reject the idea of bullying.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it, and I will recall some of the terror that I felt being bullied, but at the same time, it was an opportunity for me to find out who I was, to be courageous, to stand up, to not take crap from anybody. And that's kind of what you got to do when you're an adult in a lot of situations. It doesn't mean that you should be, fighting people and stuff, but it does mean that there's times where you got to be courageous and stand up against a group of people that are trying to bully you mentally, if not physically, in the adult world, which happens a lot of time. But I also want to talk about this idea of the victimhood mentality. And sometimes I just don't understand it, because I feel like the victimhood angle is an inherently demoralizing and demasculating position. So like as a veteran, I see myself in my services as like being heroic and honorable warrior, and we had to overcome so much to be as successful as we were. The last thing that I would want to see myself is somebody who was weak, that was just manipulated by the government, who was just like another cog in the engine. I never saw myself like that, and I feel like being a victim would take it down that route, and that just seems inherently not masculine. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's definitely not. Spitting hot takes. This is victim is very much a feminine trait. Women play victim all the time. It's always the man's fault. You see it in like the whatever podcast when they say, well, like men are the bigger victims of war. And then they push back and say, well, no, women are the bigger victims. And then you say, well, how is it that all these people are dying and they're not victims? And what it always devolves to every single time is, well, what about the men though? The men started the wars. The men did this, and there's like no accountability. It is very much a feminine trait to play victim, and it's not being a man. Being a man is exactly what you described. There is a time and there is a place where every boy is going to have to test himself to find out if he is a man and what kind of man he is. And we need to start encouraging that courageousness and ability to speak up. And you don't do that by muting the opportunities for them to see that themselves as that. That would restore a lot of the strength back into our country if boys were challenged and they were able to see who they are. Because at the end of the day, all of us are capable of standing up, no matter our size, no matter whatever. We're capable of standing up and showing that we're brave and courageous, and we need more of that in America. It's lacking. You mentioned one. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think you bring something up. When we were in the Army, I was 200, I think 25 or 230 pounds. I was really muscular, and I had a reputation for being really tough. So I didn't really get bullied much once I became an E5 by really anybody. And this is what I admired so much about somebody like Ham or Harris, is that they didn't have those attributes. They were not the biggest. They were not the strongest. They didn't have reputations of being tough. And yet whenever they were being bullied, they literally had the guts to stand up and say something, I guess, without knowing that they could back it up with their fists or something if it ever came to that. And I always thought that was like really brave.
Throughout human history, the bravest people we know were those that stood up when they were outmatched physically. And Hamstein, the Hebrew hammer, was absolutely one of those men who was brave and courageous, and it didn't matter what the outcome was. He would always stand up for himself and stand up for each and every one of us in combat and outside. And Jason, too, never take crap from anybody, always stand up for his beliefs and his worldview. And there's a lot of respect in that, because it's easy to stand up for what you believe in when you know you can beat that guy's ass, right? And they know it too. They know it too. So it's much easier to say what you have to say in those circumstances. Unlike the David and Goliath, right? It's much harder when you can get squashed like a fly. And so there's something super admirable, and that's a trait that we need to instill into everybody.
I agree. Yeah, all young men need to have that.
And there was one other thing that you mentioned, but I didn't get a chance to write it down. I'm trying to remember. Uh, Goodness. Okay, we may just have it's all right. We may just have to move on. But yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about 250 and like how important the strength of America and continuing on, challenging the Roman Empire, as going down as the greatest to ever exist. And we can absolutely do it if we reinstill these things that we talk about on our episodes of what it is to be an American man, be an American woman, and how our roles in society are impacted by how we're raised through institution and all these things. But let's get into the meat and potatoes.
Can I circle back to something you brought up? Because I think what you've done is, I think you brought up like a really important concept that I haven't heard anyone else in the podcast sphere or on YouTube or anything talk about this. And you've been talking about that we should be aiming as a country to not be Rome, but to be better than Rome, to outbeat them at every single category. And I think that's an interesting proposition, right? When America after World War II kind of became the world's hegemonic power and the most powerful country on earth, that was kind of something that even up to the 90s we grew up believing and just living. And I think sometimes people don't know how to handle success. Is it possible that en masse as a country, once we reach what we thought was the precipice of success as a nation, that we kind of didn't know what to do and how to handle all of that success and where to set a goal and go next, en masse culturally, if you will? And I think if, that thesis is, correct in some way, well, I think you provide a great answer to that. We should, as a nation, be trying to be the greatest of all time. Right now, we know who was the greatest of all time. It was the Roman Empire. They lasted over 1,000 years. The most significant civilization in human history. Now, that's what we should be aiming to surpass, so we can straight dominate them.
That's a good point. And whenever you step into the unknown, like, everything moving forward is unprecedented. Like, America has achieved unprecedented levels of success and achievement. And so it feels like that maybe it was during the 80s and later time period, but we've kind of just accepted, like, okay, this is the final result. Like, what else is there to do? And that should never, ever be the case. My old man said, I don't care what you do, but you better be the best at doing it. And that, I take that kind of mentality into everything I do. I don't care how small or how big it is, whether it's playing video games against someone or whether it's taking on the entire world and trying to change things revolutionary. I'm going to put in every single effort that I can to be the best that I possibly can be at it, because that's a good virtue to have. And maybe America hasn't been shown that vision of, like, hey, this is where we're at today, but if we want to reach this goal, which is to beat Rome as the greatest of all time, which, hello, what are we doing? Why is everybody not striving to be the GOAT? I don't understand it. If we want to do that, maybe we introduce that as, hey, here's our goal. Now let's analyze the things that they did right, the things that they did wrong, and make sure that we adjust our perspective and our lens of how we're looking through, and our moral, not morals, but look at how they did things right and wrong. And if we're following along those same paths, we should make adjustments so that we can avoid the pitfalls that they faced. And the immigration thing, I think, is one of them. And that kind of leads us right into what happened with the Supreme Court ruling, because really what this is the birthright citizenship thing is a battle of immigration for votes, quite simply, right? Most of these people who are immigrating to America, they're coming from a circumstance where they have nothing. They have nothing. And so when they come over to America, they instantly go from having nothing to having something through social services, through government funds. And this has incentivized them. Like, why are they being incentivized to be great when they went from nothing and now they have all they need and their families taken care of? What do they need to do any more than that to, start a new industry that creates jobs or anything like that? And the birthright citizenship is one of those key mechanisms, because what it does is it allows someone who's, say 8 months pregnant to take a flight on a tourist visa or whatever over to America, pop out a baby, and now all of a sudden we got a U.S. citizen, and then they return back, whatever. That's dangerous for our country, our nation. Like, there are adversarial nations. We don't live in some foo-foo rainbow unicorn world where everybody gets along and there's no difference in ideology. There are people out there, nations out there, that oppose our ideology and would see that America fall and is no longer. And we have to protect ourselves from this threat. And this is not, once again, to demonize all immigrants that come over here. There are plenty of examples of immigrants who come over here and do great things to help build our nation even greater. But we need to consider those risks that come on the other side, because not everyone has those intentions.
I agree with everything you said. I think it's important to really explain to the audience what birthright citizenship is. And that essentially means in America that if you're born in any state or territory, you automatically become a citizen of the country. And what that is extremely rare globally. For example, countries that we think are great countries quite often do not have birthright citizenship. Think of places like Japan or South Korea, very modern, industrialized, technologically, great countries. So the whole idea of birthright citizenship is extremely rare. It's a very uniquely American idea. Historically, very few countries ever had birthright citizenship. So it is something that's extremely rare to the US.
And to step in, I think the reason that it's extremely rare to the US is because we were one of the first people to free slaves. So at this point, it becomes, okay, how do we resolve the issue that some of these slaves had children here? How did they become a U.S. citizen? What is the philosophy behind that? And that's kind of where the 14th Amendment emerged, which is what is birthright citizenship. And what they're arguing back and forth during the Supreme Court hearing is essentially, what is the intent on someone being American or not? And the argument they made to try to pass this was to point out outliers like embassy ambassadors over here with kids, blah, blah, this whole thing. So they're secretly trying to mask the fact that what about the majority of the cases where these aren't ambassadors or extenuating circumstances, but they're just people seeking asylum, blah, 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 whatever. Or what about the person who is from Poland, comes over here, has a baby, and has no intention of being an American citizen, because a lot of the language is based off of intent of being an American citizen on what they proposed.
Yeah, those are totally some of the risks in each argument. I think it's important just contextually to talk more about like the history, like you said, of birthright citizenship. And originally at the founding of our country, there was no birthright citizenship. And like you said, birthright citizenship was a result of the 14th Amendment, part of the Civil War amendments. As the Civil War ended, and all the slaves were freed from the southern states. That was basically the Union senators that were trying to come to a consensus about how do we make this new freed population citizens of our country and integrate them into the country. And that was the answer that they had. So you're absolutely right. Birthright citizenship was a result of the 14th Amendment that ended the Civil War. And it was really to get all of the freed slaves to become citizens and integrated into the country.
That's right. And so I think so it all goes back to the 14th Amendment, right? So, and this was in 1868. My numbers are probably going to be wrong.
Yeah, I believe it was 68.
Okay, 1868. And so the arguments they're trying to use in this case is from like early 1900s. One of the cases that they talk about is Wong Park, I think. Wong, do you remember Wong K Park?
Yes, I believe that was the one where it was, I believe, a child born of Chinese immigrants, and the parents weren't citizens, and the question came down to them, I believe it was. But I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that case. I think first, even before we get to the Supreme Court ruling, let's talk about some of the issues and why really this case got brought forth. And I think some of the issues was, so just to back up, Donald Trump, as soon as he became president of his second term, he signed an executive order that was getting rid of birthright citizenship for illegal immigrants, anybody that was not here legally. He did not get rid of birthright citizenship for legal immigrants. It was just for illegal ones.
Which I think is an important distinction, right? Because I think that's a lot of confusion within the public. Is it's assumed on the left that he's trying to strip rights away from all immigrants, and that's not the case. We're specifically speaking about illegal immigrants and what happens when they give birth on American soil.
Right. That's exactly it, and that's the appropriate framing that it needs to have right there. Part of the reason that people were supporting Trump for doing this at the time was because we have what's called birth tourism going on in America. And this is people have said it's a huge threat to our security. And what happens is a lot of Chinese nationals and people that are affiliated with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, come to America during month 8 of their pregnancy, have the kid in America, and then get that citizenship, go back to China, raise their kids to be communists, and then come back here. And, you know, that allows the possibility for those children to gain elected office, or just to do a lot of things that are contrary to the best interest of the American public. So birthright tourism is just one of the many examples that people were pushing for Trump to start this executive order to stop.
Birthright tourism. I just heard, and I listened to the hearing that they had about 3 months ago on this, and they reported that there was over 50, or maybe it was 500. I can't remember for sure. I'll have to fact check that number. But there was either 50 or 500 plus companies that's whole job and their whole business model was to take Chinese citizens and do this tourist, what'd you call it?
Birthright tourism.
Birthright tourism. So people are paying these companies to basically run this operation and time and everything so that they can come here, have the babies, take them back to their countries, instill their ideologies into them, which are inherently non-American, send them back over here. And that's how you have people rising up through the ranks of Congress who are communists, quite simply, as their same party yells at the other side for being Nazis, which is insane.
Yeah. And so I think that sums up, many of the threats that come along with birthright citizenship and why Donald Trump was trying to stop this. And then after he filed the executive order, basically within a couple weeks, I believe, is when this lawsuit got filed. This lawsuit got filed in New Hampshire in federal district court. And like what has been happening, there was a nationwide injunction put on place from that Obama appointed liberal judge, which basically stops the executive order from being enacted, not just in New Hampshire, but across the entire country as a whole. And these nationwide injunctions historically have been extremely rare. For example, in the 19th and 20th centuries, there was only 27 total nationwide injunctions. We're talking, 200 years here. However, in Trump's first term, there was over 64 total nationwide injunctions, and now he's looking at over 40 so far, just 2 years into his second term.
So real quick, and I may have missed it, but can you explain to me in the audience what an injunction is?
Yeah, an injunction is a civil remedy that is granted in civil court, and in this exact example right here, what it does is it stops the government from carrying out Donald Trump's executive order because they say it's unconstitutional. It's also common to see injunctions in disputes with like labor unions and employers and stuff like that. But generally, an injunction is to force somebody to do something or civilly force somebody to stop doing something. In this example, stopping the carrying out of that executive order by Trump.
So I think that really speaks to something unique here, because the numbers you said 27 in how many years?
In the 19th and 20th century combined, there was only 27.
Only 27 through close to 2 centuries, and yet Donald Trump has pushing 100 since when his time is in office. I think that speaks a lot to like just the disdain and hatred for the person as an individual, that despite what is best for America, that we have people based solely on the fact that they don't like President Trump pushing back and trying to prevent him from doing anything or getting anything done. 100 is insane. That's the four times the amount that there was between the 19th and 20th century, right? So I think it speaks a lot to like a failure of our government, our Congress, to and not just Congress, obviously the court leaders, district court was the one, federal district court is the one who filed this. And so just people, despite just sitting back and thinking about, well, there is a problem with communists getting baby citizenships, is implanting them with ideologies that are un-American and sending them back here. That is a risk. Why can't we look at things objectively and logically and say, okay, I hate Donald Trump, but perhaps he's right. This is in the best interest of our nation.
Well, also, I think it brings up like a paradox or dichotomy, if you will, between, I guess, a person's political will, or I guess the legitimacy of their vote, and also state sovereignty, and then, federal voting. Like, for example, Trump won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College overwhelmingly. He had a popular consensus to carry out, his immigration policies, birthright citizenship question being one of those. A state like Texas, votes overwhelmingly to control immigration because they're most affected by it. So, you're thinking after these elections, the majority of the population wanted this. This is what they voted for. This is what they're supposed to get. But then you got one state like New Hampshire that, extremely liberal in New England, doesn't deal with immigration the same way that the southern states do. They just don't have the same problem at all in any way, shape, or form. Now you basically got one liberal judge in New Hampshire that is overriding the will of popular consensus and the vote to effectively determine what the immigration policy for the entire country would be. And this liberal judge from New Hampshire was never voted. It's federal, so they were appointed. So it just brings about a lot of questions like, how much is your vote really worth in this quote unquote democracy if some tiny state like New Hampshire that doesn't deal with any of your problems is able to override popular consensus?
that seems unethical. And I've never heard that perspective before, but you're absolutely right. America wanted the things that President Trump is trying to enforce. And what difference does it make if no matter what, you can have someone who the public didn't even put into power and does not represent them in any way, shape, or form? How can we have them disrupting the wants of the majority of America? That seems unethical, unconstitutional. It seems just downright evil. It's wrong. I don't understand how they can have that much power. And again, like you said, they're not suffering the same problems of immigration, simply more than the southern states, simply because they border another nation, right? So like, where are people coming in from? People aren't people aren't coming in from through the Mexico border to go, to New Hampshire. That's a long travel. It costs money to travel, do all these things. So what are they going to do? They're naturally going to just kind of exist around where they came across from. And of course, some people eventually move, but just by sheer numbers, they see the real impact of what is happening with immigration. New Hampshire has no idea what the impacts of immigration are, yet they're dictating the fate of our entire nation as one tiny little state. Who lives in New Hampshire? I don't even know if I've ever met anybody who's from New Hampshire.
Yeah. I've been to New Hampshire a bunch of times. It really is a beautiful state with great forests and everything. But at the end of the day, it's not going through what Texas has been going through over the last 30 years. And it's, kind of ridiculous that they get to decide national policy because of one person who was unappointed. So I really think that's like the background of this case right there. But you spent a lot of time listening to the hearings, and what after listening to the hearings and knowing that the Supreme Court was going to make this decision soon, what do you think in the lead up everybody was anticipating?
I can speak. Are you talking the American citizens?
Yeah. What is your thoughts on it? Like in the lead up to this, how did you think the Supreme Court, with a majority conservative justices and 3 of them appointed by Trump, how did you think that they were going to rule on this?
Well, I thought that there was no way it was going to get. I thought there was no way it was going to get overturned. To me, I'm just going in this looking at like the details, and it seems to me that the risk does not outweigh the reward, and it just seems inherently unfair that you can just come and have anchor babies in America, and all of a sudden you gain citizenship. There's just too many things that can go wrong from having that sort of strategy, and it's mind blowing to me. And even listening to the hearing, it seemed that all the justices were pushing back and asking the right questions, like saying, "Well, you're quoting this definition of domicile from 1927. How does that apply to when the framers were actually writing this in 1868? What are we basing it off of? What the framers wanted, or are we basing it off of what was later deciphered down the road?" And one of the guys, General Sauer, I forget his position and title, but it was like the Attorney General, but different. I don't know exactly what his title was, but he didn't have the answers to these sort of things. And to me, like even listening to it post the ruling, it surprises me that they ruled in favor of the birthright citizenship. I don't understand. Again, I need to deep dive into like maybe interpersonal relationships or something. I don't know how they made the decision that they made, and it surprised me.
Yeah. I think a little while later we should walk through what the opinion really was and what they said and how they got there. But I'll speak to the lead up. In the lead up of this, I kind of thought there was no way that they would come to the conclusion that birthright citizenship is for everybody, even people who are here illegally, especially with the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. But then when we kind of see, and we'll talk more about what the official opinion said, but now it kind of seems like these conservative justices that Trump put on, it seems like they've been very liberal and very willing and open to side with some of the more extreme liberal Supreme Court justices, rather consistently, instead of taking a hard stand in something that's more originalist or textualist based. I find that surprising. I think it's something that America needs to be concerned about. We need more Clarence Thomases and less people that are willing to cater to the liberal side.
Usually, sides stick to sides. You got that whole tribalism thing. So then the question becomes like, why have their philosophies shifted at all? Could this in any way be impacted by just the sheer dislike for Donald Trump, or is it a follow the money type situation?
I don't think it's either of those, honestly. I think, and so let's discuss the opinion right here. So I believe it was written by Amy Coney Barrett, and basically she was making an originalist argument for it. And she was saying that when the amendment was established, there wasn't restrictions put in place at the time. It was open to everybody. The people who made the amendment and voted it in weren't even anticipating the issues that we had today, so it doesn't address those or speak to those at all. And she basically was saying that it's up to Congress to pass a law that would, I guess, determine what America's immigration policy officially is. So in some ways, she kind of passed the buck. In other ways, they didn't pass the buck, because they are correct that that's Congress's role in our government to be passing these laws. So I'd say a lot of the conservative justices do that, though. They take an originalist or textualist point of view. They say the founders didn't speak to this, or they didn't anticipate this. This is the role for the legislature to be passing laws. Unfortunately, it speaks to a much bigger issue we have as a country, and that's facing us, and something that we have to look at. It could lead, in my opinion, to the downfall of our country, and that is the role of Congress. Congress basically doesn't do anything anymore other than pass, one or two pork barrel spending budgets throughout the year, but they're not really putting forth legislation anymore. And this is what they should be doing to control the immigration issue. And so I think that's one huge takeaway that we should all get from the ruling of the Supreme Court on this case.
I lost you there, bro. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so basically Congress's job is to pass legislation. So they make all of our laws, all of our rules. Think about like the EPA laws. That was all passed by Congress in the 90s. Now the official codes and regulations, that's proctored through the agency. But as far as the actual laws that you could be violating, that's passed by Congress. The formation of that agency is passed by Congress. So it's Congress's job to really set forth what the immigration laws should be in our country. However, they have completely neglected that responsibility and not passed any immigration laws since the 90s?
That seems right to me. So the fact that they're not passing laws, but they're just challenging language of the Constitution to fight against immigration, is that your contention that this is what they should be focusing on? Why are they focusing on this?
I think what Amy Coney Barrett in a lot of ways is saying is that this is a generous, I'm giving Amy Coney Barrett a generous interpretation of her opinion. And I think in a lot of ways, what she's saying is that constitutionally, it is not the role of the Supreme Court to be deciding what the immigration policy is.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. Now, inherently, their decision does that in a roundabout kind of way, right? And now it does allow for illegal immigrants to have anchor babies here. And It does set forth some of the immigration policy. But her argument is that it's not the role of the court to do so. It's the role of Congress to pass laws that are ratified by the president that determine what the immigration policy is. And that's not happening.
Okay, I got you now. I got you. Okay. So leaving the Supreme Court to essentially write these laws on immigration is not the focus. The focus is of passing bills that affect immigration policy, which hasn't been done since the 90s. So why aren't they doing their job? And one would argue that's probably is what led up to where we're at today. And another thing that this impacts is how we're going to be able to execute the deportations of illegal immigrants.
Oh, absolutely. Just thinking back, you remember in Minnesota what the media coverage was like of ICE when they were there. And in my opinion, not doing anything extreme, just arresting people who were violent criminals and trying to deport them. How do you remember that?
Minnesota, the whole escalation of that thing is a wild thing. It really set a wildfire off across America of people protesting ICE. And I mean, I don't understand the concept. Like, we're removing people who are doing heinous things within our community, regardless of whether you're even committing violent crimes within our borders. The fact that you're here illegally in itself is a crime. These people have to be removed. If we don't have the order of law in our nation, do we even have a nation any longer? And so people, would see, like, the thing is, these people, you can't just ask them, "Hey, buddy, you're here illegally. Can you just come outside and let's go to the airport and get you out of here?" People don't want to leave, man. How else do you expect them to be removed than without force? And I think that they've done a great job, especially since we have these agitators, protesters coming to harass it while they're trying to do a very difficult job in the first place. Now they also have to worry about being attacked from protesters. I've seen them throwing big ass rocks, taking chips and stuff out of the sidewalks and honking boulders at these people while they're simply just trying to get illegal immigrants out of our country. And people just went berserk and started acting irrationally. If we would just stay out of it and let them do what their job is to do, we could get this thing done as humanely as possible and resolve the issue in our country, which is we've allowed too many people to be here illegally, and it would go as smoothly as possible. But when you introduce all these protesters, probably paid protesters, I would guess, to agitate the whole situation, it makes their job much more difficult to execute, which in turn is taking more of our tax money away, right? If we could clear out, say it's 10 a day or whatever it is, and that's what we're doing while we're being harassed and they're preventing vehicles from moving around, and we removed that barrier, we now do 25 a day, and this reduces the amount of work that's being done and what it's accomplishing, which comes out of our tax money. This is our money that we're paying for. So we're not utilizing our money to the best of its abilities when we have people out there making their job harder.
Yeah, it makes the whole thing harder. The biggest takeaway for me from the whole Minnesota ICE time period was that there is no, I think, effective way that you can make a deportation not look uncomfortable, right? When these people are getting handcuffed by ICE, the public doesn't know their criminal record. Many of the people, it's came out now months later, that were deported during the Minnesota ICE stings were charged with some very heinous crimes and convicted in most circumstances. And not only that, there was lots of people who were repeat offenders on there as well. Some, don't want to get into it, but some very heinous crimes. So I think the lesson of that is that there's really, the American public in general is not comfortable with deportations. Now, with this ruling by the Supreme Court, I think it makes it even more impossible for ICE to do their job effectively. it's basically saying that you cannot throw out any parent of an anchor baby in the country at all, no matter what their criminal record may or might not be. I think it effectively strangles a ton of the immigration policy that Trump was overwhelmingly elected to carry out.
Yet another case of interfering with what the majority of America wanted, which just seems blasphemous, honestly. But you raise a good point, because people were freaking out at everything. Every little video clip that would come out got people all incited. So now you can't even approach separating a child who is now a U.S. citizen because of this policy from the parents who are illegal, regardless of what they're doing ethically and morally in terms of obeying the law within our communities. So this is just free reigns. Now, I'm not a soothsayer or a fortune teller, but I can imagine that this is going to result in one thing, and that is more people who have bad ethical standards utilizing anchor babies to get out of being deported just because they committed crimes. That's a dangerous game to play, and I think it's the wrong decision for America. It just incentivizes people with no ethical code to do things that will damage our communities, and it's detrimental to our communities. We can't have it. What do we do? Yeah, our hands are tied now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we're going to be able to see any, I guess, lasting change that's positive on the immigration front as a result of this ruling, because I just don't foresee Congress ever getting together and taking any action at all, never mind appropriate action. I have no faith in Congress.
And I think it all just goes back to just like such disdain for an individual, rather than focusing on what is best for our nation. And these are real concerns. These aren't, we're not just making things up in making a straw man here. These are real circumstances that happen all the time, and they don't benefit our community in any way, shape, or form. People's lives have been taken in these circumstances that could have been avoided. American lives have been taken, and it could have been avoided. We're supposed to take care of our nation's people and our nation. That's our government's job. And regardless of whether you like someone's politics or not, when the American people say, hey, we want mass immigration, we want to end birthright citizenship, then the majority of the people who elected the representative, the president of the United States, to execute those things should be allowed to execute those things, because that was the people's wish and desire. And that is the obligation of our government, is to fulfill those.
Well, it's also, like you talked about, an erosion of the democratic vote and what a person's vote actually means, the weight that it actually holds. If that vote for a citizen in Texas is to be overridden by, one person in New Hampshire, at what point does it start to become a little dangerous, in the sense that, not physically, but in the sense that we have a group of people that are, they say they're for no kings, but then are acting inherently undemocratically.
One step closer to dictatorship, bro. That's what this is. One step closer. How theoretically, how would we solve this problem? How would we prevent these decisions being able to be made by one person in lieu of what the country wants? Is there legislation? How do we go about fixing that?
Well, legislation by Congress is the answer to everything. It's in theory, the most powerful arm of our government. In theory, and we have too many judges that have been nominated that are just bad judges, in my opinion. And that is one way to, I guess, curtail the issue. But I guess I I'm very pessimistic on that Congress could accomplish anything. And I just think back to this presidency. I mean, Trump literally dominated that election in historic fashion. They had a majority in the House and majority in the Senate, and they weren't able to accomplish anything. As a matter of fact, after just only a couple months, I feel like the majority of the, not the majority, I feel like there was a large percentage of, but definitely the minority still, of the Republican House who actually turned their back on Trump, his policies and agenda in general. For many Republicans, after the stunning election in which they had the majority, many of them, their biggest policy concerns became Israel and Epstein. You know, look at Thomas Massey, for example. And I know he's a libertarian, but basically he was elected with a Republican constituency to represent Republicans. And that's, you know, the side that would most agree with any of his policies. He's not alone. Marjorie Taylor Greene is another, you know, massive, influential figure in the House who, after Trump got elected and we finally had a ton of momentum going and Congress could have been making some legislative changes that would benefit our country, decided to step down and make all of her complaints about Israel and the Epstein files. And it's that's why I'm very pessimistic, very black-pilled about Congress and if they have the ability to fix anything.
We have to have hope, Casey. There's something that can be done. We can turn the tides in Congress and maybe do this. But it seems that a lot of why there's always pushback comes back to President Trump. And he's just left a bad taste in people's mouth, and they despise him so badly for whatever reason that they're willing to just fight every single thing. So do you think it's just Trump's demeanor, or do you think it's his policies? Like, obviously his demeanor hurts him in some instances. Most of the complaints I get or I hear about Trump is just he's an a-hole. Like, he's an a-hole. And so I think that hurts him. But the reason that he's getting so much pushback, even from his own party, is it policy driven, or is it just they just don't like his character as a human being?
I think it's definitely the character. Problems are certainly a piece of it. And I guess it's a larger piece for the liberals that can't seem to get over that. And I would say for the Republicans that are anti-Trump, it's more of just an annoyance, you know. And I would think they look at it like that. I think for a lot of the Republicans, though, that turned on Trump over the last 2 years, I think it has to do with more of them positioning themselves for what comes next after Trump and trying to read the tea leaves through social media.
Okay, so what they're seeing is and this happens a lot, right? You have the pendulum and it swings way too far this way to the right. And then when it comes back, it swings way too far this way to the left. And so what they're anticipating is that they're so fed up that it's going to swing back that way. And they're trying to position themselves so that they have some sort of political leverage once that transition takes place.
Well, yes, because I would say at the time you saw not all, you saw a lot of Republicans turning against Trump, and a lot of them were making it over Israel. Coincidentally, there had just been a 2-year social media campaign largely funded by George Soros and the communist, Marxist, liberal organizations globally to, I guess, really make Israel look bad as a country. And I think they were piggybacking off of that, right? They see all this anti-Israel stuff going viral on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all that. So I think a lot of them were using that as kind of like their wedge issue to differentiate themselves from Trump so that they could elevate themselves when Trump is gone and he's not running.
So essentially, like, we're getting a lot of pushback about the Israel thing. And so if they separate themselves and remain as an outlier, like, I believe in these policies, however, that gives them an advantage come elections or whatever.
Yeah, and I think there's an even bigger correlation when you look at the timing of it as well. When they started to turn on Trump, it was when the whole Epstein release, the Epstein files, was really a viral trend on social media. And what that did was, on social media, it does seem like there was an overwhelming consensus to really complain and argue and demand the Epstein files. And I'm not saying that the Epstein files should have been kept private. I'm not insinuating that at all. What I'm saying is that I think for the average American, the Epstein files were of very low importance compared to immigration, compared to the economy, compared to the tariffs, to gas prices, to all of those other things, right? They, on my list, Epstein was like maybe the 15th most important thing, maybe not. So, but what that does on social media, it was viral. It seemed like there was unanimous consensus. A lot of that is from bots. A lot of that is from foreign people in other countries. And it was a wedge issue that was first being used by the Democrats to kind of disrupt Trump's momentum on where he was going, and to bring a lot of negativity through the media onto his administration. And that's when you saw a lot of Republicans jump on board there as well, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, and a lot of them as well.
Yeah, and even though for the majority the Epstein thing is low priority, it is the most interesting and the easiest thing to hyperbolize. And
Right.
And what social media has become is a tool. And what they do is, like we were talking about the bell curve, and how you got the bell curve and the majority of people are sitting at the peak, hence why it's the peak of the bell curve. But on the left and the right, you have these extremists, right? And they make up like 2% of the population. I know they tout like the No Kings March or whatever, like, oh, we had like 5 million people show out. Well, if you do the math, this is like 1.5% of the entire population of the nation. So how big of a turnout was it really? And so on this bell curve, you have these extremists. And what they've learned is that these are the interesting things that are going on. Everything that's happening at the apex of the bell curve isn't as interesting. But if they can take these extreme sides, view them, exploit them, and hyperbolize them, what it can do is it's kind of the same thing that Always Sunny in Philadelphia does, is right. They take a social issue and then they break out the sides. There's two on the left, there's two on the right, and then there's something in the moderate. And what they do is they do a great job at arguing and sensationalizing the idiocies of both the left and the right side to show how extreme and ridiculous they are. Well, this sort of thing is what's being played out on social media. If you can take going to the protests and hammering how ridiculous and stupid and illogical these people are, and then come over to this side and show how hateful or blah blah whatever these people are, you can use that to move the middle of the bell curve either slightly left or right, and this is how they gain votes. The extremists on the left and right, they're not important to the voting class. They're only important to hyperbolize the issues and bring out the strongest points in either side. The left leans more towards empathy and the right leans more towards logic and security. And they played those sides to try to sway the population of the voting class. And the Epstein files were one of the, like you said, you couldn't scroll on any of the social media platforms without Epstein this, conspiracy this. And it's one of those topics that, while isn't important, is interesting, that will draw in the standard America. And then, of course, all sorts of conspiracies evolve of that. And conspiracies are some of the most entertaining things, like sci-fi and fantasy, that you can read about. It's entertaining. Now, of course, what Epstein did is horrendous. But I didn't happen to see a lot of like evidence that Trump was somehow involved in these sort of things, but it has been used to label Trump, while also kind of burying the fact that, like, I don't know, man. Clinton and Maxwell's go way back. They did Clinton passed legislation in the education bill that benefited her father, who was the publisher for all the main textbooks that were going into education. Like, I don't know. To me, it seems like the Clintons, for instance, were much more likely to be highly involved in whatever the heck Epstein was doing rather than Trump. I haven't seen any sort of that evidence, but the fact that it's been used to stigmatize Trump is powerful, and that's a tool that's being used to sway the middle Americans to like, if he's a diddler, I don't know if we can say that for TOS, but if he's this, then I can't possibly support him because how could you? But I haven't seen the evidence of that. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the Israel campaign, right? And this is something that I don't quite understand because, again, Western ideology, which was founded based off of Judeo-Christian ethics and moral code and law of governance, is the greatest form of governance that has ever existed and will ever exist on planet Earth. And there's really only two bastions of those ethical systems in power with any sort of leverage. The rest of the globe is basically fighting against that. And that's America and Israel. And it seems to me that it should be in our best interest as Western ideological societies to make sure that we remain as a stronghold to fight back against this Marxist, socialist, communist movement that is sweeping the globe.
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of reasons why our relationship as a country with Israel benefit us. And I consider, even though they're in the Middle East, I consider them a Western philosophically country like us, especially because of their founding in 1948. There was so many Europeans who were establishing the country based on a Western philosophy. So I think there's totally a ton of good reasons. But I want to circle back to the Epstein thing. I think it's also important to remember that the Epstein conspiracies are not new. We remember the whole Pizzagate scandal and what happened with that. And there was a guy that showed up and fired off a gun. I believe one person was shot inside of that pizza restaurant. And then there was, we had QAnon online, and they were coming up with the craziest conspiracies online, but it became its own niche viral trend with lots of people who believed that stuff was going on. And some of these beliefs, were, blood transfusions, adrenochrome, but many of them, some of the more mainstream, less conspiratorial ideas were that thousands of children, many whom were illegal immigrants, were being trafficked through Jeffrey Epstein, and that horrible things were happening to them along the way that probably don't want to get into, that should never happen to children. But that's what we were all led to believe, for a period of about, 9 years or so. And this was on social media. This was in podcasts. This was on Joe Rogan. This was so popular in the American psyche that South Park literally made an episode about it. And I think they had Oprah doing something. Maybe you can put a clip of that in the top corner of the window. But that was the backdrop of the Epstein files. So when you have those type of conspiracies in the American psyche, it's so easy to radicalize a whole movement in that direction. And I think when the Epstein files were actually released, nothing like that came to mind. There was not prepubescent children there. There was not thousands of migrant children being trafficked through there, sold into slavery. That wasn't happening at all. It seemed like there was a lot of gross stuff with Bill Gates and prostitutes and stuff like that. But it didn't seem to be what like the QAnon or the South Park or what they were saying on Fox News about, just the migrant children being trafficked through there. That didn't really seem to happen. Was that your read on the situation?
I think it fell flat, and that's what left Americans unsatisfied because they'd been going down the rabbit hole of the Epstein craziness and everything surrounding that, and they built up in their head this grand conspiracy that there's alternate entities, ball worship, all sorts of crazy things that once the files were released and it showed the extent of what was going on, which of course is immoral and wrong and all that stuff. It seemed that most Americans were unsatisfied with this because they really were expecting like some grand release of conspiracy. And that's the interesting thing about conspiracies. If these conspiracies that you believe in are true, then you have no power and you'll never know about them or not. So you'll never be able to confirm nor deny them. Well, actually, the only way to deny their existence is to confirm their existence. Otherwise, you just always go back to, well, they're in control of everything. They're not releasing all the documents. They're not giving us all the information. And if you live like that, then like, why bother even getting up in the morning because you don't have any control or power over anything. One of the things that you mentioned, and I thought was important to touch on, is how many of these children were being smuggled in as S traffickers. I don't know if I can say, or as being trafficked. And, you know, Trump was fighting back against this because a lot of what would happen is there'd be these underage girls who were being shuffled across the border by these grown men. And along their journey, they experienced like, I think maybe it was Charlie Kirk who had spoken on this. And you can see like in the body language of a child that is being abused. And if you look around, obviously it's not abundant, but if you look around, you can see a child who's in a situation that is not a situation they want to be in, like no eye contact. They're like, you can just tell in their body language, and they're being shuffled across by these grown men. And Trump implemented back in 2019 DNA testing, a simple, quick swab where you could swab the child and the adult who's bringing them in, find out if there is any DNA relationship, and if not, then you can take care of that individual who is clearly trying to traffic children across. Now, this ended under the Biden administration. I think 2023 or something like this. They put an end to that. And I don't know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it seems weird that you would want to eliminate a policy where you were making sure that children were with their parents crossing into a new country before they go out and lose existence, and next thing you know, they're prostitutes on the street or something like this, and their life was stolen from them because America wasn't doing its duty to help put in protocols that would protect them from being in this situation. And that was removed by the Biden administration, I'd like to point out, after Trump tried to fight back against that, found a solution for that issue.
Yeah, unfortunately, many of the Democrat policies that we've seen are masked in care and kindness for the immigrants. But like you said, in that situation, not protecting children is very unkind and very uncaring. And really what they were doing was trying to transplant a multi-generational loyal voting base. But I really, speaking big picture, because conspiracies do exist, right? There was a ton of conspiracies during COVID. They told us it didn't came out of China, and it was racist to say it came out of the Wuhan lab that literally made COVID-19. They said that was racist to do so. It never occurred. They said that was just a psyop, more Russian propaganda. They told us that Dr. Fauci wasn't involved in COVID-19. So conspiracies do exist. I think there's a difference between a theory of conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. And I would say that a conspiracy theory has an unfalsifiable hypothesis, whereas a theory of conspiracy is falsifiable. What would you say to that?
Oh, that's a good distinction, right? Because again, there's always nuance within things. And you're right, a conspiracy theory, like I was saying, if you believe that they're in control of everything, then the only way to disprove something is to prove it actually exists. So there's actually no way to disprove that it actually exists without confirming its existence. But a conspiracy does exist, right? And there's documented cases throughout American history, throughout world history of false flag operations, stuff like this, for instance, where there is a conspiracy being committed, and this is the theory on how that conspiracy was committed that can be either falsified or not falsified. So I think that's a great distinction, because if we live in a world where we say, oh, conspiracies are all nonsense, then it leaves out the fact that there are conspiratorial efforts going on. Like you mentioned, the voting for the immigration. It's no surprise that all the immigrants that flooded to primarily blue or purple states that would be swing states come voting time. Like, this is a strategic conspiratorial effort to overturn the voting efforts for the conservatives, essentially.
Yeah, especially when it correlates to a time when they're moving restrictions on voting and doing mass ballot harvesting and mass mail-in vote in a lot of these places.
Right. This sounds like a conspiracy to me. And it's not just a theory, right? That Nick Shirley was one of the first ones to expose the voter fraud that was going down in California. And one of the a gentleman here in Colorado ordered the voter rolls. Excuse me, he ran for Secretary of State, I believe, way back when, and he didn't win. But he found, like, instances, there was a single apartment within an apartment building that had 99 registered voters in a short period of time. 31 of those voters that registered to that address came in the month of October in 2023. Now, of course, there's no crucial election that was going on at that period, but the fact remains that why was there, and these were names that aren't typically American names, most of them were of Arabic heritage, but 99 people registered to one building, 31 in 1 month, that seems suspect. People are like, well, it's an apartment building, people come in and come out. Yeah, that's true, but do they sign one-day leases? How do you move your furniture in and out of an apartment that you're living in 1 day? I don't know too many apartments that offer one-day leases. So these conspiratorial efforts to sway the votes in the election are happening. They're not conspiracy theories. They're theories to commit conspiracy, and it's happening. And we need to draw a distinction between those two, because if we think all conspiracies don't exist, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, and also if we live our life that everything is a conspiracy and everything is unfalsifiable, what a demoralizing black-pilled view of the world that would be.
Yeah, let's just go move into the woods, pack it up, and just survive, buddy. There's no point in even participating in society and humanity if that's the case. That's that defeatist view. I blame the victim mentality on that one too. It seems like everywhere the sneaky head of victim mentality pops up, it's never in a good instance. Whenever you play victim and do that whole thing, nothing good emerges from it ever.
Yeah, and it's so easy to become a victim, especially when society is telling you that you should be rewarded for your victimhood or rewards other people for their victimhood. I think you see this a lot with, like, the liberals and the Democratic Party, where they'll look at, like, minority and affinity groups as if they're victims and push historical tragedy as if it's the most important issue of today. And you know, they do it saying that they're being kind, but how demoralizing of a message is that essentially you're born into a state of weakness. You can never escape the state of extreme weakness, and that historically all of your ancestors were mentally and physically so weak that they could never overcome. That's the message that I hear from that, and maybe that's the wrong interpretation. But when I hear that message from liberals and Democrats, that's what I'm hearing, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that sounds horrible. Please don't put me in that category under any circumstances.
Absolutely not. Can you imagine when we were fighting the Brits for our independence, if we just said, we're doomed, we're victims anyway, let's just give up, pack it up, and go home, and America doesn't exist. It's never, I co-sign on that. Do not put me in that category ever. I ain't hear no bell. You know what I mean? I'm going to keep getting up, keep fighting and swinging until my last breath on anything. I will never be the victim. I will always overcome and persevere. And that's why we are warriors. Shout out to the boys of Panjaway. You guys are all warriors. It was an honor to serve with you. with that, we need to lock and reload, rather. I got to throw in another one for the occasion. It's time for a refill.
An old dip dap for the lip lap.
Shout out Skilly Goat Gilton, baby. So, yeah, I guess we can divert back into the birthright citizenship. We kind of derailed a little bit there, but I think there was a lot of good conversation.
Yeah, I got a question for you. So, if my kind of hypothesis about the big takeaway from the birthright citizenship ruling by the Supreme Court is that Congress has not been effective and it's unlikely that they will be effective in the future, what does that mean for a country that is built on three co-equal branches of government when you have one branch that is completely neglecting any responsibility?
Well, it seems to me like that's a failure of checks and balances. And again, I think it moves one step closer to tyranny. And the minute that anybody can overrule anything on such a small level, it speaks to doom of our nation. I've been trying to ponder and think of a solution since we've been in here, this conversation. I don't know one yet, but I know that we have to find one. We can't allow for any branch to hold all of the power. Otherwise, what our nation stood for has fallen, and we might as well just hand the keys over to the communists now and get ready for the gulag.
Earlier, you were talking about how we should, as a nation, be looking at Rome essentially as one giant case study. And at the fall of the Roman Republic, there are some interesting parallels. Like, their senators, their version of Congress was unable to pass a lot of bills. It was very hyper partisan the way it is today. There was lots of leftist protesters, similar to how we see today with Antifa resorting to violence and terrorism to kind of achieve their political motives. So in those ways, there's certainly some similarities. I think a lot of historians argue that the downfall of the Roman Republic before Caesar, in large part, was a result of ineffective senators in their government not being able to get anything done. So how can America, as a three-part government, continue to, I guess, operate effectively as an institution when you have one branch that is not getting anything done? And do we have the potential to see the fall of our own republic? You said it brings us one step closer to tyranny, and I think you're right. When Congress is abdicating all of their responsibility, they're essentially telling the executive, the president, act like a king, make all these laws, and then we're going to use these unelected bureaucrats, which are the federal judges, to either co-sign or overrule you.
Perhaps we've started approaching these things without like a philosophical mindset like the ancients did, and just spoke on the logic and data. Maybe empathy and all these feminine qualities have infiltrated so deeply into our political government that we're no longer able to debate philosophically using logic and coming out with the best solution for the situation.
Well, it's interesting. At around the time of the fall of the Roman Republic, Rome culturally was criticized in some respects for a massive gaining wave of feminism spreading throughout their society. And, it finally led to like 60 years later when Augustus Caesar, the first emperor of Rome, was putting in a ton of statutory reforms to kind of change that trajectory and make Rome a much more, not much more, but more of a masculine society, and fighting back against that wave of feminism that they were experiencing in their own way, unique to their time period at that fall of the Roman Republic period and leading into the early empire period underneath Augustus.
I'm briefly reading about this because I wasn't familiar with the feminist movement in Rome towards the end. And it seems to me that these are the same things that emerged, just reading through this real quickly, these are the same things that emerged in the 60s with the women's rights and all that sort of things, involved with property rights, made divorces more easy to obtain. More women entered the elite sphere, the influence sphere.
Less marriage.
Less marriage. Yep. Marriage laws forced declining marriages, which reduced birth rates. Thank you.
Increased immigration.
Which increases immigration. These are literally the same things that are happening to our nation right now. This led to the fall of the Roman Empire. What are we doing? Isn't the left the side that keeps yelling at me about, oh, you got to go read the history books. You got to read the history books. Whose history books are we reading? Let's look to the history books of the nations who achieved the greatest level of success in human history. Let's look at those history books, see where they came up short, and make sure we do not follow that same path, or else we will fall. America must beat Rome. Let's go. Oh my goodness. I'm just reading this, bud. Sent me on a tangent. These are the exact same issues we're facing today.
Well, not only that, but at that time period, exactly, there was two parties in the Roman political system as well that were fighting just the way we have now. I mean, the parallels are so uncanny. It's really insane.
So then there's the philosophical question. Is this something that's always going to emerge in societies? Regardless, is there any way to beat it down? Maybe Islam's got the right idea. We need to throw the women in bags, keep them in the cupboards and away from positions of power. No, I joke, obviously. I'm joking. But the feminism thing, I mean, all of it is perfectly orchestrated. Is this, and again, this is something that's outside my scope of knowledge, so I'm just spitting here, free flowing here. Was there outside influence, I wonder, for the Roman, for the hatred or the adversary of the Roman government, that this thing was kind of instigated in the same ways that it was instigated here in America? Was it implemented by outside sources, or was it something that emerged within the Roman Empire?
I think it's totally a mixture of both. One of the very one of the very interesting arguments that was being made from the leftist side of the Roman political sphere at the time of the fall of the Republic was all the criticism of Rome historically being imperialist, colonizing, oppressing the oppressed. In a lot of ways, that's what led in part to Caesar crossing the Rubicon. And
wait, hold on.
The Civil War.
Caesar wasn't the leader of America. You're describing America's situation right now, aren't you?
Isn't that interesting? Another parallel.
These parallels are unbelievable, bro. Okay, continue. Yeah, it's really unbelievable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail your thought there, but I thought it was funny to interject because you're describing this, and it's exactly what we've been witnessing happening in America in real time.
The founding fathers of America were well versed on Roman history and Greek history. They were trying to blend the parts of Athenian political theory that they thought worked really well into the Roman system, because the Roman system, they had an emperor who would act like our president, right? They had a Senate that acted like our Congress, and then you have local democracy at the local level. So the founding fathers, being well versed in all this philosophy, they were all students of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, and well versed in Roman history as well. And they were trying to mold like both of those forms to come up with a perfect form of government, and it worked very well for them. But nowadays, very few people understand Roman history or even take the time to learn it. Very few people could tell you the difference between Plato and Socrates. Most people have never heard of Aristotle. These are just subjects that we're not teaching in school. We're not teaching them in elementary school or high school. And very rarely, I guess, are we teaching these in college. Like, I feel like Plato's allegory of the cave should be something that's read and understood, fully comprehended by any child in elementary school, because it's such an interesting model to view the rest of life through. But we don't do that. So is it any wonder that as we get away from analyzing the successes of these past great civilizations, that we start to repeat the mistakes that they made?
Yeah, and it's bound to happen. And part of the way that kind of exacerbates that happening is not reading these teachings of the greatest thinkers that this world has ever seen. And you mentioned Plato's allegory of the cave, and I think that's a great example because a lot of you can map that story directly onto what happens in social media in terms of people believe, like, for instance, you get a short clip of an atrocity or something that happened from ICE or whatever, and they sensationalize this clip. And if that's what you believe to be true, that's what you believe to be true. But if you were exposed, just like when he was brought out of the cave, exposed to the full clip of the video, you would see things from a different perspective, a different life, and understand a greater truth. And if people understood this concept, and that's such a great allegory, if they understood this, they would be able to map it onto reality, and they'd be able to be better critical thinkers and kind of look through what is true, what is not true, and be better thinkers for it. And why we've stopped teaching these sort of things. I mean, you can go into conspiracies again. Is it they're trying to model citizens who aren't thinkers? Maybe, like, dumb people are easy to control. The why I don't think is as important as the fact that what it is, and that is that we're not learning these great teachings from brilliant minds. We're not looking at the greatest models for republics to our empires or civilizations that exist, looking at them and saying, here are things they did right, here are things they did wrong, and being able to take that and then parallel it to what's happening directly in real time in your nation and say, hold on, oh, yikes, I don't like to see where this is going. Maybe we need to start adjusting what we're doing to compensate for that.
I also think it's downstream of a feminine bias in education. And this is in no way to denigrate or put down women or anything, but the majority of educators in our country, whether it's primary school or at the college level, the majority of educators are women. The majority of professors are women. The majority of people getting their PhDs, their JDs, these are women. And I think if you look culturally across our country, women statistically don't tend to show a great interest in Roman history or in Greek history or in military history in general. But so much of antiquity and ancient civilization and the lessons that we learn from that are all correlated in conjunction with their military history as well. Like, even when most people are studying Rome, they're studying the Civil War, the Roman Civil Wars, which was the fall of the Republic, or the Punic Wars that helped Rome establish the height of the Republic period. So I think a lot of that is a result of a feminine bias in education, and we all have biases, right? If the educators were predominantly male, we would see a much more masculine side of educating our children, which we just don't see or have today. And I wonder if that's a part of it.
It definitely is a part of it. And so then the question becomes, how do you balance those two things? Because obviously it's great to get perspective from both angles, but when you're being fed something from one side, the entirety of your career of gaining knowledge and wisdom, that is education system, then you don't, it's again that allegory thing where you're not getting the full surroundings of what you're seeing and understanding. So how can you be good at critical thinking or any of that? So then but here's the thing though, women are more likely to go into education because of this sort of nurturing response. Like, these people are caretakers. This is what they're biologically engineered to do: take care of the children, take care of the elders, these sort of things. And so naturally they gravitate to those sort of positions when men don't gravitate towards those sort of situations. And you can't implement some sort of DEI situation to kind of correct for that, because then you're getting people who aren't qualified in positions just based off of numbers. And so I guess it becomes, do you run a propaganda campaign? And I use propaganda loosely because everything is essentially propaganda, but do you run some sort of propaganda campaign to try to incentivize more male leaders in the education system?
I do think it would be great to incentivize more male educators, but education, academia, like a lot of fields that we've seen over the last 50 years, men have just receded and relinquished a lot of those fields. Like when you think about it, historically, even public education really became en masse a thing during Prussia's history, following Frederick the Great. And initially it was established, all male teachers, all male student body. And then when we implemented the same model in America, it was boys and girls, but the majority of the educators were all males. It was all male institutions. Now it is completely flipped. And it's hard to say really why that change happened, right? Why was it masculine to be a grade school teacher in the 40s and 50s, and nowadays it's not? That's an interesting question.
That is, because now that you think about it, so I brought up the point that women are more nurturing and they tend to lean towards these sort of positions like healthcare and all that. But you make a good point, because that's historically not how it's been. And educating, mentoring essentially is what it becomes, is mentoring young minds is a super masculine thing, right? You're passing on your wisdom, your knowledge to another person to grow them. This is something that's inherently masculine. And, there's a reason that in churches, it's supposed to be, male leaders, male prophets. And a lot of that is driven from our leadership capability. But you're right. It hasn't historically always been that way. And I think we need to bring back that being a mentor, just like the ancient philosophers, and passing down knowledge and to children is a very masculine thing to do. And honestly, I would argue that it's our duty and obligation to our future generations to do that.
How are we going to survive as a culture moving forward if men aren't passing down the information that they gathered? It's just real interesting to see how society has changed along that way, though, because it's been flipped so extreme. It's exactly the inverse of what it's always been historically.
And that's that oscillation thing, right? It seems like it's just something natural within the human condition or the function of the earth or whatever, that things tend to swing one way heavy and then go back the other way heavy. The thing is I feel like the pendulum swing gets further and further each time, instead of receding and finding a balance. It just gets, and pretty soon you're just swinging so far out there that it gets out of control. And I think what we need to do is we need to adjust so that we're swinging back and forth. Okay, these things didn't work, but these things worked. Come back over here. These things didn't work. These things worked. And then find an intermediary between the two. And I think that's where you're going to have the most success. But it has swung full swing the other way. And I would argue that it's not best for our nation. And I would point to the Roman Empire and say, yo, a lot of these things derive from the same issues that we're facing here. I don't feel so good, right? I feel like there's a drunk driver behind the wheel and we're headed towards a cliff, and it's like, hey, you see that, right? You see that up there. And they don't, they're blind to it or something. And we need to fix that, because we need to beat Rome. We are the greatest, and I refuse for America to go down in history as anything other than the greatest civilization to ever exist. Set our sights on Rome. Let's beat them. Let's make America the greatest of all time. Make America go again.
One interesting point of note is that after the crisis of the fall of the Republic, after the Civil War, it did lead to a 300 plus year Pax Romana, which is considered the greatest time to be alive in human history before today.
All right, tell me a little bit about that. I'm not familiar with the Pax Romana.
Well, basically, the Republic fell, and then we had a second civil war because Julius Caesar was assassinated, and that was when Augustus Caesar won that war, took over, became the emperor. It was no longer a republic, and there was really 5 amazing emperors almost back to back, and then it led to 300 years of peace and prosperity and technological and economical innovation across the entire society. Some of the most famous philosophical thinkers are from that Pax Romana era, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like Marcus Aurelius and his philosophy on Stoicism. And so the Roman society, culture, and empire grew exponentially during that 300-year Pax Romana period, and so I think it just goes to show historically that cultures move through cycles, and they were at a cycle of it, just like we are, except they were more extreme, more violent. Thank God we haven't got there yet. I hope that we never do. But then society settled back in, and they were able to reform and push in a positive direction. Although that new direction did not resemble the founding of Rome in many ways, because the Republic just didn't exist.
Is it for the best? One hopes, but the good of the scorpion's not always the good of the toad. Am I right?
So did they make my friends a genius or not?
What's this dummy science nerd talking about? You couldn't even make my friend more smarter. All right, back to business here. We're talking about the Roman Empire, 300 years. Was good.
Yeah, Pax Romana, parallels.
Well, shit, what do you want to get into next? Genuine allegiance. So that was one. Oh, we could touch on that. The allegiance aspect, like how do we push back against like what the allegiance is, and how do they determine? Oh, one of the Jackson, who was it? Justice Jackson, Ketanji Jackson. She said, like, how are we going to be able to like you say, it's based off of intent. So if the elite, he argued that it would be based off intent in the terms of if they planned, and I think this is why they pointed at the Dred Scott case, because they said that it was an intent whether they planned on staying in America or they were just here visiting, and that's kind of how they would end the birthright tourism or whatever. And then she argued, like, okay, but they immediately get the citizenship. How do you even? What are you interviewing them? Are you interrogating them at all on their intentions of being in America and who their loyalty is held towards?
I think that leads to a bigger philosophical question, and that is, when it comes to immigration, but I would say even just to the general American public, how do you determine a person's allegiance to your country, right? And I don't know if you can do that statutorily or legislatively. I think the only way you can determine and filter out what an appropriate allegiance level is for a citizen or anyone who's residing in our country is you have to do it culturally through other institutions. And so I think that's one of the huge challenges of an allegiance, right? You can't just question somebody on it. Allegiance, is reinforced through the school system, through churches, through community organizations, through sports, stuff like that. So it is really challenging to, I guess, determine a person's allegiance. And I know I've talked a lot here. Let me just say one more thing, and I want to pass the mic back to you. But how, like, for example, how would we determine the allegiance of our country from Democratic voters? You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, different ideologies and principles, and like you said, allegiance begins from day one, essentially, of propagandization is what we can call it. We can call it this. And I think that word propaganda is a tool. And like most tools, it can be used for something good or it can be used for something bad. It's when a tool falls into the hands of the person with not good intentions that it becomes a problem. And so, for instance, when we were kids, we began the day by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, right? To the United States of America. And as a transition started to switch, I think, as I was leaving like K through 12 education, where you had people saying, well, I don't want to swear allegiance to God, so they would be able to sit out, sort of thing. And I think that's devolved to a point now where institutions in public education aren't even having this thing. They're not pledging allegiance to the flag for fear of offending someone. But let me ask you, if you're in the United States of America and participating in the United States of America, shouldn't you be pledging allegiance to that nation? And if you're not, who are you really allegiant towards, especially if you're, say, a dual citizen or an immigrant from another country? If, like, again, we talked about it, I forget on a different episode, but they bring these people onto these podcasts and they're dual citizens and they ask them, if your native land in America went to war and there was no immoral, it was equally as immoral for each or moral for each side, who would your allegiance be to? And they sincerely have difficult, and these are people who basically grew up here since the time they were 3-4 years old or whatever. They have a hard time being able to identify who their allegiance is towards. And so for that fact alone, it seems to me that we shouldn't be doing this birthright citizenship because there are too many gray areas where it jeopardizes the security and well-being of our nation, and we have to push back against that.
Yeah, and I don't see the allegiance aspect as one that's unique to immigrants, although I understand why it's important in the immigration debate. I think historically, allegiance to be a United States citizen had a lot of very complex meanings. And I think a lot of that, like, for example, just historically, what it meant to be an American when we were growing up was that you would join the military if the country was at war, that you always believed in I guess, that the country was morally right in what we did, at least for the most part, on large scale, that we are moving in a moral positive direction. A lot of things like that. And I think it's easy to have a complex system of allegiance for a society that's relatively homogenous, that's relatively high trust, and is not a low scarcity, or that is a low scarcity society, meaning that our economically we're very plentiful. But I think as the scarcity becomes more of an issue, the culture becomes less homogenous, you have less racial homogeny. I think trying to operate on a scale of allegiance that is extremely complex becomes rather difficult at that point.
And who's your allegiance to? Right? Because you have two different sects of Americans who have different beliefs and ideologies. So
right, and it's not even unique to immigrants. I don't think any conservative or any veteran could really look at liberals and say that they have the same type of allegiance to the same country that we do. In many ways, I would say they're opposed. They're not allegiant at all, and you can just see on who joins the military and who doesn't during a time of war. It's certainly not liberals joining the military. So I think what you have to do moving forward, because our society is not going to be homogenous overnight. It's probably not going to be homogenous again in our lifetime. And I'm not even talking racially. I'm talking about the way we think. Like, I would compare it to America in the 90s. In the America 90s, politically, Republicans and Democrats were the biggest parts of their arguments were whether mandatory minimums should be 3 years as opposed to 10 years, or whether tax rates should be at 5% as opposed to 2.5%. That was the split between Republicans and Democrats, and really in the 80s and 90s when we were growing up. That's the type of homogenous thinking and philosophy I'm talking about here. It's unlikely that we will see that again in our lifetimes culturally. So I think the way you get past that is by making our definition of allegiance basic, a lot simpler. We got to start easy. What can we do to get everybody to buy in? And start rebuilding from there. What do you think?
I think that touches on what we've addressed several times. We need a goal, right? Common goals bring everybody together. And you're right. Like in the 80s and 90s, morally, ethically, and ideologically, we were all pretty closely aligned on what we wanted and desired. The differences were as small as that, right? Criminal justice reform and tax hikes. That was basically the division. And that really, in the large scheme of things, isn't a lot compared to what we see now, which is division on so many micro topics within those three things that it's completely we're on complete different paths. So we need to set sights on a goal, and that goal is that we need to look at the Roman Empire. We need to beat the Romans. We are greater than Romans. We are Americans. And we need to look to them, look to what happened out there, and try to find balance in how we're legislating and going about business here in America so that we can achieve that goal. It seems that America is kind of lost, and we're just yelling. What the scene? Remember the scene Always Sunny when the gang gets invincible and they're sitting inside at the bar and just yelling at one another. Charlie's like, "All right, everybody, we're just nitpicking at each other. Let's go touch some grass," basically. And that's what it feels like and I think that's from a lack of direction and vision, because if we had a common goal to work towards, that at least gives us a point that we say, okay, this is the end point. Now, how do we get there? There are these different views on how to get there. And then we can test the logic on each of those views and say, okay, this way will work, this way won't work, but this way will work and that way won't work. And then we start moving towards that goal. But first, we have to be real. We have to deal in what we're observationally seeing, what the data tells us, what just common sense, follow the path logically where that could lead, breaking that down. But we have to live in reality, and we have to have these tough conversations with one another to regain that sort of thing. But until we can focus on one common goal and then work towards that goal and hash out our different variances on how to get to that goal, we're cooked as a nation, and we won't make it that 1,000 years, bro. We just won't.
I do got one potential. I just thought of this off the top of my head. One potential, I guess, thing that we could do to get moving in that direction, and throw this out. Maybe this is stupid because I just thought of it. But what if we tied selective service to the ability to vote? And what I mean is, what if you can be an American citizen, but what if you are not allowed to vote unless you've registered for selective service? That it's not requiring a lot of people. It's still giving people a duty. It's still giving people a responsibility, but now there's a privilege associated with that duty and responsibility as well. What do you think about that?
Right. That's not a bad idea. And so when you register for selective service, all this really does is says that in the event of a draft that you're going to be entered into that draft.
Yes. Yeah. That way people would have skin in the game.
Okay, then let's go to the feminist talking point here. Does that include women as well?
I would say so. I would tie the vote to selective service. I think you shouldn't get privileges without duties and responsibilities that come attached.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I believe in the idea that there should be some sort of forced public service to your nation, whether that be obligations into the military or whatever. I think that that's extremely important to building that stake in the game, as you call it. And I have all sorts of wild ideas on how we cannot. I mean, when the fathers came together, they knew that some people should not have a right to vote. They don't have enough skin in the game. They don't have enough knowledge. And when you have people making uninformed decisions to lead the future of a country, that becomes a problem. You can't have someone uninformed on nuclear physics in there playing around with plutonium, trying to enrich it and make nuclear energy if they don't have any basic understanding of physics and quantum physics and all this stuff. So why would you, if someone who doesn't have an understanding of geopolitical or any of these sort of things, why would we have them deciding? If you don't even know how the economy works, why should your vote contribute to deciding how the economy should work? We should be informed in these. And so I have a lot of ideas on how that we can make sure that the voters are informed voters and all this, but those are probably a bit extreme. But this solution is a simple solution where it says, hey, if you want to have a decision in the future of America, you have to be willing to put your life on the line for your nation, because you're going to be questioning whether certain geopolitical wars are necessary or any of these other things a lot deeper. I think that you'll become more informed because that can affect your life and your livelihood and your family. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I think it could be a simple solution to implement as well.
You get the increase in people want to vote inherently, and some people view it as a right when in reality it's a privilege. It is not a right to vote. It never was a right. Most people in America, whether men or women, could not vote in the early days, right? The founding fathers wanted people that had stake in what decisions were being made about their country, and so most people didn't even have the right to vote. And so I think that matches the same sort of identity where you must have stake in the game, and it benefits our nation and will make people think critically about all these political issues that we face.
I agree, and a lot of it comes with some of the inherent pitfalls with democracy, and this was stuff that Plato talks about a lot in the Republic, where a lot of times democracy might start out really good with the founders who are all committed to a certain set of ideals. In America, it was you had to have skin in the game. That meant that you were a property owner and that you were informed on what you would be voting on. But it is devolved in America, and just like it did in Athens, where it became that, and it transferred into something more like rule by the mob, or what the mob is doing. And generally the mob is not the most intelligent reflection of society, but it is a large populace reflection of society at the same time that wields I guess an overwhelming amount of force.
And we see that taking place and playing out in our streets today. While they may not be the majority, they're definitely the majority. They're definitely the loudest. And it seems that, like cancel culture, for instance, were most people offended by certain things? I would argue no, at least in my experience. However, these people were so loud and out there that they were able to influence change to the point where if you said something stupid that was supposed to be a joke, you now lost your entire livelihood. And that's a dangerous game. The mob mentality. You need to have informed people making decisions. Having a wild card to someone making reckless decisions is not good for anybody.
Yeah, that's how you end up getting the brakes cut out on your van.
Wild card, bitches. But yeah, dude, no, that's a good point. Yeah. I don't know, dude. What else do you got?
I don't got anything else, bro. I
we cleared 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I think this is a good podcast.
It's good. I think this went really well. Well, Casey, before we go, I didn't do any plugs, but make sure you guys subscribe, like, and follow Crossfire Republic. Let's grow this baby. Let's bring back 80s America. Let's put an end to victim culture. Let's bring back America first and American patriotism. We are Americans first and foremost. Let's bring back taking down the Roman Empire at the top of the totem pole for the greatest civilization. That should be America's spot. We are competitors, we are warriors, and we will not accept defeat. We will remain victorious and go down as the greatest country to ever exist in human history. And it starts here with Crossfire Republic. Casey, it was a pleasure today, buddy. Thanks for being on. One more shout out on our next one on Wednesday. We're going to be having on a very special guest for the Bastards of Panjwai, one of my best friends of all time, Jason Harris. He fought the law and he won. This man is a genius. He's a storyteller. He's got lots of great insight on the war in Panjwai. We're going to have him on. We're going to bullshit about the Panjwai and our experience there, and it'll be a good time. You know, it'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with Harris. He's the man.
He is the man. All right, brother. Well, we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And God bless America, baby.